Yellowstone National Park is the home of Old Faithful and also one of the largest supervolcanoes on Earth. But in spite of this, no one has died at Yellowstone from volcanic activity in over 600 years. And that is not because we have been dormant for 600 years. In fact, we are currently living in the middle of an eruption cycle that began with the last eruption 365 years ago. So how can it be that we haven't killed anyone in over 600 years when we just blew up less than half of that time? The answer is simple. It all comes down to what kind of eruptions we are having. For millions of years, Yellowstone has been erupting. From the beginning of the park, our eruptions have shaped the land and continue to do so today. There are 3 major calderas in the park, meaning large depressions formed by major eruptions. Each of these calderas represents a different stage in Yellowstone's history. The oldest is the Yellowstone caldera, which was formed by a super-eruption 2 million years ago. Today, the remnants of this first caldera are found in the very center of the park and make up the core of the park's geyser basins. Because this eruption was so long ago, there were no humans around to witness the event. 7 million years ago, however, humans had not yet evolved. However, something else was here to see it. And no, I don't mean Bigfoot. I mean mastodons. These extinct relatives of modern-day elephants roamed the Earth during the Pleistocene epoch, which lasted from 2.6 million to 11,700 years ago. This was a time of glacial expansion and contraction, and mastodons would have seen the world change dramatically in their lifetime. They would have witnessed the formation of the next caldera in the series, the Mesa Falls caldera. This caldera was formed approximately 1.3 million years ago by a massive but not super-eruption. A super-eruption is defined by the Volcanic Explosivity Index, or the VE, where a number from 1 to 8 describes the explosivity of a volcano. For example, Mount St. Helens in Washington erupted in 1980 with a VE of 5, while Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines erupted in 1991 with a VE of 6. Super-eruptions have a VE of 7 or higher and are among the largest eruptions in Earth's history. Yellowstone's most recent super-eruption was 640,000 years ago and created the Lava Creek caldera. However, the Mesa Falls caldera was not a super-eruption, only the second largest in the park's history. Its magnitude is estimated to be about VE 5, like Mount St. Helens. While this would certainly be considered a large eruption, it was nowhere near as powerful as the super-eruptions that we have seen in the past. As far as we know, humans still weren't around to see this one, but the mastodons were still here, and they would continue to roam the land for another 300,000 years, until the next eruption. At 640,000 years ago, the super-eruption that formed the Lava Creek caldera occurred. This was the most recent super-eruption in the park's history. During this eruption, an estimated 2,500 cubic kilometers of material was ejected into the air, forming the vast majority of the park's current landscape. Most of the ejected material came in the form of ash, with minor amounts of fine rock and pumice. If you want a rough estimate as to how much material was involved, 2,500 cubic kilometers could fill up Madison Square Garden almost 100 times. But if humans weren't around for the first 2 calderas, why were they here to see the third? Well, the answer is pretty simple. They just got here. Humans arrived in North America somewhere between 14,000 and 20,000 years ago, right after the last ice age. They would have found a very different North America than the one that we know today. The climate was much colder and drier, and many of the megafauna that we associate with the American West today were not here yet. Bison and elk were present, but not the giant species that we see today. And species such as the grizzly bear, gray wolf, and mountain goat were absent. Humans would have hunted these animals instead. Species like the North American camel, the Jefferson's ground sloth, and the dire wolf. And they would have found a landscape shaped by the most recent caldera forming eruption. But this eruption was not a super-eruption. In fact, it was much smaller. It had a VE of only 3. To put this into context, Mount Vesuvius, which destroyed the Roman city of Pompeii, had a VE of 5. Mount St. Helens had a VE of 5. And the most recent Yellowstone eruption, which happened just 365 years ago, also had a VE of 3. So why doesn't everyone think that the last eruption was the worst one? Well, that comes down to the type of eruption rather than its VE. This eruption was a highly explosive phreatic eruption, meaning that it was caused by the interaction of magma with surface water. Water vapor and dissolved gases were suddenly released, resulting in an explosion. This type of eruption is very dangerous and is responsible for some of the deadliest eruptions in recorded human history. Krakatoa in Indonesia in 1883, for example, was a phreatic eruption that killed over 36,000 people. While highly explosive, the danger zone for these types of eruptions is generally localized. Yellowstone's most recent eruption would have been deadly to those who witnessed it, but it was only felt outside of the immediate area. On the other hand, the 640,000-year-old super-eruption was not a phreatic eruption. Instead, it was a massive release of pressure, causing the magma chamber beneath Yellowstone to violently expand. This caused the overlying rock to collapse, releasing huge amounts of gas and ash into the atmosphere. Ash fell over much of the western United States and Canada. If humans were around to see both of these eruptions, there is no doubt that more lives would have been lost in the 640,000-year-old super-eruption. But the fact that these two eruptions occurred so long apart means that we have not seen the worst of Yellowstone. Eventually, the next super-eruption will occur. And if humans are still around to see it, it will likely be the deadliest event in our history. But all of this really begs the question, how long do we have until the next super-eruption? Well, unfortunately, there is no easy answer. Scientists can look at the history of past eruptions and try to predict when the next super-eruption might occur. But these predictions are just that, predictions. No one can say for sure when the next super-eruption will occur. However, scientists do know that Yellowstone is currently in an eruption cycle. Since the park's inception, we have had 3 periods of high activity: 1985 to 1986, 2004 to 2012, and 2018 to 2021. During these periods, seismic activity increases and the ground swells as magma moves beneath the surface. These periods are separated by quiescent periods where little to no activity is recorded. We are currently in one of these quiescent periods, and the last period ended in 2021. It is impossible to say whether or not the next period of heightened activity will end in an eruption. However, scientists are closely monitoring Yellowstone to try and get a better idea of when the next eruption may occur. Regardless of when the next eruption occurs, it is important to remember that Yellowstone is a national park and home to some of the most beautiful scenery in the country. It is also home to some of the most dangerous wildlife. If you ever visit, be sure to take all necessary precautions to stay safe. If you want to learn more about Yellowstone National Park, be sure to check out the resources in the description below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.